Is qualia just reduced to effects? Like effects from stimulus? Or is that just evading qualia and trying to explain it out of existence? Let's see a little bit from the conversation between Alex O'Connor and Keith Frankish on illusionism.
Then maybe we need to break down the nausea qualia into the wanting to go to the bathroom qualia. But the point is, at some point, these reactions are going to sort of bottom out in things that don't even seem to have qualia at all, that are just like a beliefs or whatever they might be. The idea is that what we're doing with qualia talk is bundling together complexes of reactive dispositions that we're aware of in ourselves. And here's the kicker. Here's the thing about this. It has to be something like that for qualia talk to track anything that matters.
But that's just the thing. Qualia is the first-person primary impact of that feeling that we know firsthand. We identify with that pain or the good feeling or whatever the quality of the feeling is. That's what qualia is. And that's the part that needs to be explained. Why is there a feeling associated with all the functions in the body?
Because if it's not tracking things that affect us, if it's tracking something that doesn't have any effects on us, that can't matter at all. How can it matter if you say, look here, this animal's in pain? You say, oh dear, what's the consequence? Yeah, it's not having any effects. It's playing around perfectly happily. It's it's in horrible pain, but it's just having a lovely time.
But is it in horrible pain? That sort of doesn't make a lot of sense. If, pain is a special kind of experience and our reactions are going to happen in response to that feeling. We don't have the feeling in response to the behavior, do we?
Doesn't matter then. It's the people who reify pain, who treat it as something non-functional, that are not taking consciousness seriously. I'm taking it seriously because I think it's part of this messy, meaty, brown-coloured biological world that we're in.
I agree with that, except, like, of course, for qualia to mean anything, it must have an effect on us. And I think I could just stipulate that, like, qualia necessarily does have behavioral effect on us, but that those aren't the same thing. Because you said a moment ago, like, well, like if I was sat there, say I was feeling nausea, but there were no effect, like I didn't care about it, mm-hmm. I didn't notice it, all this kind of stuff, then what's left? Well, I could just say, well, that's impossible. You can't have nausea without having those effects. Not because they're the same thing, but because one entails the other,
And this gets to the point that Alex O'Connor is pushing back on, that function is not the same thing as the experience of the function. These seem to be two different concepts altogether, two different categories. The qualia is where we find all the meaning and, it gives us the reason for response, but it isn't the same thing as the stimulus, the functional properties that gave rise to the feeling of those processes. Those seem to be two different categories of ways of speaking about the entire process of pain in this example, and then all the things that led up to it, the function.
Same way that I could say, I don't know, if I put a big sort of metal object in a bathtub and displaced all the water, and I told you that all the metal object was just the effect on the environment. There was no metal object. There was just the effect on the environment. Like, well, hold on. No, of course there's a metal blob. And I said, well, look, take away all of the effects. Imagine that no water was displaced. Imagine that there was no splashing sound. Imagine that you couldn't see the metal object because that would be an effect. Imagine that you couldn't hear it. Imagine you took all of that away. What would you be left with? I'd be like, okay, in fairness, you couldn't have the metal object without all of those effects. But the metal object is still its own distinct thing that's causing the effects. And I want to say the same thing about qualia.
Okay, well,
Yes, this is a really good example that hones back on that point. You know, it's a strong pushback against Keith Frankish. His illusionism is that it appears to explain the functions of experience while leaving the existence of the experience untouched. So Frankish will oftentimes argue that what we call qualia, they're not really intrinsic mental properties, but rather dispositions, judgment, representations, or maybe just like he said, the effects of all that processing, cognitive processing. The problem for me is that this seems to shift the question rather than really answer it. So you could frame the objection like this. You know, effects are not the same thing as experience. Suppose someone says, you know, the blueness of blue is just the effect that certain wavelengths have on your nervous system. Well, I would say that, well, the neural effects explains why I discriminate, you know, blue from the red, classify colors, talk about colors, and react to them. But they still don't explain why those effects are accompanied by an experience of blueness at all. In other words, the effects can explain behavior, they can explain the reports, the discrimination, but do they really explain the presence of experience itself? That is precisely what is in dispute here. And this gets back to what I always talk about. The map isn't the territory. Imagine explaining music by describing speaker vibrations, auditory nerve activity, or dancing. You may have explained every functional aspect, but someone could still ask, like, why is there something it is like to hear that music? You know, isn't the dancing just a response to the qualia of the music? The functional description seems to leave that out. So for me, Frankish response is essentially, there isn't anything more to explain. And this is what I'm not really certain of. I don't know if that's really true. You know, even if qualia are illusory, the illusion itself must be experienced. Consider a visual illusion. I mean, the illusion may misrepresent what's really out there. I don't think anyone really seriously thinks we see reality as it truly is. But the experience of the illusion is still real, right? If qualia are an illusion, then who's experiencing the illusion? What is the illusion appearing to? And, you know, Keith may say, well, the brain merely represents itself as having qualia. But I ask, why is there something it is like to undergo that representation? We keep kicking the can. You know, and some folks might argue that illusionism risks becoming self-undermining. Like suppose like Frankish were to say, you only think you have qualia. The immediate response would be, well, thinking I have qualia is itself an experience, right? The belief, judgment, or that representation, I mean, it's still occurring within awareness. So the existence of experience seems to reappear in the explanation itself. So that's why, you know, O'Connor keeps saying the explanatory gap remains. He keeps pushing that because physical responses can explain, you know, why a system would react to stimuli, learn, remember stuff, categorize stuff, even report experiences. But why should any of those processes be accompanied by subjectivity? Is he really destroying the hard problem of consciousness by just relegating consciousness to an illusion? I mean, why is there seeing rather than blind processing? Or why is there hearing rather than silent computation? Pain rather than just non-receptive information transfer, right? I think Frankish answers essentially that there's no further fact beyond the processing. But it seems like, the feeling of that processing is what we know more intimately than anything else. It's the primary thing. It's the way we interface to all that processing, right? So, to conclude, for me, Keith Frankish seems to explain the functional consequences of the experiences, but he's just denying the reality of the experience itself, in my view. Now, he doesn't really say that explicitly, but when you go into explaining how a stimulus affects behavior, cognition, and reporting is not obviously the same as explaining why there is something as it is like to undergo those effects, there seems to be something missing. The neutral effects of seeing like blue may explain, color dichotomy or discrimination in the verbal reports, but they don't seem to explain the experience of the blueness itself. So illusionism still appears to dissolve the hard problem or it attempts to, dissolve the hard problem simply by redefining rather than actually solving it. That's my own view. What do you think? Leave some comments below. Let me know what you think about this whole thing. Like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know what I'm missing here. Maybe I am missing something, but it just seems that, this feeling is the interface to, it is our interface to that objective external reality. And it appears to us as a feeling, The question is, why is it that way? Why couldn't it go on in the dark? And so if that's a valid question, then how does illusionism solve that problem? Let me know what you think.
Why is there subjectivity? This landscape built by what I see. A world of sound and touch and thought is the only truth I've ever caught.